My name is Taylor Trevino. I am the Voting Rights Senior Advocacy Manager at the Texas Civil Rights Project. We are a statewide legal advocacy organization. We work across three issue areas, so beyond borders, criminal injustice, and voting rights, which is my program area. And we work in and out of the courts to really defend Texans' rights, especially my work in voting rights, make sure that everyone has free and fair access to the ballot, make sure that they are able to cast their vote, free from intimidation, free from barriers, and really protect our democracy at the state and local level any way we can. I would say one of the bigger ones is SB1, which was passed a few years ago. And while there are several different changes, I think the biggest provision is going to be when it comes to mail-in ballots. So if voters are voting by mail, you want to make sure that you put both your driver's license number and the last four of your social on that ballot when it's going to ask you for a form of ID, because they make sure it matches with what they already have on file on your voter registration. Most people don't know which number they put if they registered maybe 20, 30 years ago or even 2 years ago. So making sure that you are filling that out as thoroughly as possible is going to be really huge in making sure that your ballot doesn't get rejected. Um, that's a big one. There are some smaller changes that I think probably don't affect as many people. That could be something like, they've increased the penalties for illegal voting, which is very rare. As much as some people might lead you to believe, voter fraud is not an issue really in Texas. Um, but you do want to make sure that if you're registering to vote or if you are voting, you are fully eligible. So that way you don't have to face those additional fines and prison time. It's insane. Um, if you are assisting a voter at the polls, you have to sign an extra form that you didn't have to before. Maybe there's additional rules around that. Or if you're driving people to vote curbside, certain things like that. Again, nothing too huge, nothing that's too much of a barrier, but things that might be helpful for people to know if they are, in these categories going out to the polls. Let's start with the why. It's really important to make a plan. I think one, just to make sure that you actually do it. I know for me, if I make a goal or say I'm going to do something, sometimes if I don't think about all the little things that that's going to take to make it happen, it may slip through the cracks. Um, People are very busy, understandably. It takes, voting doesn't take very long, but it is time out of your day. You have to go somewhere, make sure you have the right ID and everything like that. So it's really important to just have everything exactly laid out so that once the time comes, you're ready to just go. Um, when it comes to how to make a plan, you want to think about where you're going to vote. Somewhere like Austin and Travis County, you can vote at any polling location in the county, so that's great. So maybe think about what's nearest to your work or your home or the school that you pick your kids up at. You also want to think about what time. There's 2 weeks of early voting, including Saturday and Sunday. So if you work at 9 to 5 and that's hard for you, maybe think about going on the weekend. Of course, there's election day, but I always encourage everyone to vote early if they can. Lines are often shorter then as well. You also want to make sure you have the right ID. And that's something else that I think is really important for people to know, is what kind of ID they might need. In Texas, you have to have either a Texas photo ID, whether that's your driver's license, ID card, a handgun license, or a U.S. issued photo ID, so like a passport. A lot of people do have these already. Make sure you have it with you. But if you don't, it's also important to know that you can vote with something called a reasonable impediment declaration. So you can go to the polling location and sign this form that says, hey, for this reason or that, transportation, work, things like that, I wasn't able to get one of these IDs. So if you fill that out and then also bring a supporting form of ID, basically any government document that has your name and current address, think voter registration card, utility bill, paycheck, something like that, you can vote with that as well. So when it comes to our crazy Texas voting laws, like you mentioned, they can be strict, but there are ways to vote. So I just really want to encourage people to make sure they're looking at different avenues and really know your rights, so that that's not an issue. My first answer, I was going to say this will be a shameless plug for the election protection work I do at Texas Civil Rights Project, but call the 866 Our Vote hotline. We have lots of volunteers, both volunteer and staff, who are answering those hotline calls and are there to answer voters' questions from what ID do I need, where do I go vote, to, hey, I'm feeling intimidated at the polls. This poll worker said something really weird to me that I feel like is off, or maybe they turned me away, but I know that I'm registered and I know that I should be able to vote. Any types of issues like that, call the hotline. We are here to help you. It's nonpartisan. It's a free resource to everyone. It is also available in different languages, so Spanish and various Asian languages, as well as there's a specific disability hotline, as well as an ASL line for people who are, hearing impaired. So I really encourage people to use that resource and to share as much as they can, because yeah, we our goal is to make sure that everyone is able to successfully cast a ballot, and we've got people there who can resolve these issues in real time. Um, Whether it's calling the elections administrator, telling them to tell their election judges to follow the state laws, we've got professionals who are there to help. The first thing I would want to say is I hear you and I understand, and I am not surprised. I think it happens to even all of us sometimes to, get disillusioned by the system when we see it maybe not working in our favor, or we see things happening that our politicians are doing that we don't agree with. And it's like, well, I voted and there are still negative things happening. I understand why people might feel that way. Um, And I would also say that your vote really does matter, especially in local elections. It often does come down, or it can come down to a handful of votes, or a few dozen votes. And these smaller elections, like city council, school board, are where the decisions are made that most impact our day to day lives. The closer to home it is, the more local, the more you're going to see it on a day to day basis. And I think so. The ATX Musicians Advocacy is a great example of that. When it comes to like housing policy, affordability, the parks in your neighborhood, like the lights on your street that may or may not be working. It's little things like that where your vote really does matter. Of course, on a presidential scale, things are a little bit different, but things are never going to change if we don't put that effort in. We have to really hold our politicians accountable. And if the same status quo keeps electing them and there's no change in the electorate, why would they have an incentive to change their policy? Right? We have to hold them accountable. We have to demand what we want to see and use our vote as one element of that power. And I will also say that civic engagement really is about more than just voting. There's so many ways. I mentioned, the advocacy y'all do at city council and things like that. The state legislature is coming up. Call your reps, email them, show up at a hearing if you can, and really let them know what your priorities are. Because yeah, voting isn't everything. It's a lot, but there are many ways to stay engaged and to really demand what we want to see from our politicians. I will say there is a Texas Railroad Commissioner race this November, that I think a lot of people are probably not aware of. A lot of people don't even know what the Railroad Commissioner does, which is understandable, but it's oil and gas regulation. So if you think about statewide environmental issues, and really making sure that our big companies are not polluting and things like that, that's something that we get a say in this November. Um, it's tricky in a state like Texas because as much hope as I have for change, and there are probably some flippable seats when you think about like Texas legislature, we know how a lot of these are going to go. And we know that when the legislature is majority one party, as it currently is, there's not a whole lot maybe writing on this one election for our statewide policies. But like I said, we have to keep moving the needle. And I think, I will say in Texas, I feel like we've seen, I will just say, conservatives really choosing the less extreme candidate in local races, which is people saying that there's this a wave of extremism, and that's not, even for conservatives, that's not who we want in office. So things like that, the more that we can keep moving the needle and have people in office that better better represent the majority of Texans' views, the more we're going to get closer to really making change on that statewide level. Your voice and your vote is your power. Um, this is something I was thinking about closing with, but it really is up to all of us to harness that power and leverage it to make as much positive change in our communities as possible. So I would tell everyone, please make sure that you're registered to vote, make a plan to vote, bring your friends and family with you. If you are someone that is, typically a voter, um, and there's someone in your life that is maybe more on the fence, they're going to trust you more than anyone on CNN or Fox or MSNBC. That peer-to-peer trusted relationship is more effective than anything. So keep working on those issues. And also, if you're not so political, there's lots of things, talked about other ways to be civically engaged. Take those up, or even if it's mutual aid or direct service organizations that you can get involved with, where donating your time or food or supplies can really make a difference in someone's life. I would say find your route, find your niche, find what feels really good for you, um, to make any kind of difference you can, because we all have to be there for each other at the end of the day, right? Like, we all only have each other, and the most that we can do to try and be there for each other, protect our neighbors, and our family and friends, whether it's at the ballot box or just, in our neighborhood, I would really encourage everyone to do.